who is the president of the African School of Governance. Indeed, the main reason that drove this conversation is to use the opportunity of the school, the new school, to speak to the issue of governance in Africa. It's a new institution created through the vision of a number of African leaders with the idea that they want to cultivate the next generation of professionals and leaders and scholars. And they want to equip a new generation with the skills that will be able to deal with the challenges of governance in this new era, the 21st century and beyond. They are going to focus on the historical perspectives of governance and development. They will teach courses on African development history, governance history, and many case studies. And the idea is that those who finish from the school will become a cluster of transformative agencies. To talk about the school and other ideas of governance is Dr. Kingsley Moghalu, whom I will introduce now. He's a very famous name, a political economist, transformational leader in governance and public policy. He's the president of the new African School of Governance, a graduate level Pan-African University. And before now, he was the founder and president of the Institute for Governance and Public Transformation, a public policy think tank. He's very well known in various countries. In Nigeria, he received the national honor of the Officer of the Order of the Niger. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers and has a degree, honoraris Doctor of Laws, from the Anambra State University. Welcome, Dr. Moghalu. Welcome. We have two people to interview him. Unfortunately, Dr. Lerato Mbele is having challenges with electricity. There is power crisis, and she may not be able to join us because there is no electricity where she's based. Professor Nimi Wariboko will be leading this interview. Is a Walter G. Mulder Professor of Social Ethics and Director of the African Studies Center at Boston University. Is very well known for many books and essays on economic ethics, examining the global monetary system, development ethics, religion and economics, political philosophy, social transformation. Years ago, he was an investment banker in Lagos, and he worked on Wall Street. During the 2010s, Wariboko consulted on the economic dimensions of national security for the National Security Advisor of Nigeria, and he also participated on performance evaluation of the Vision 2020 of the Nigerian economy for the Central Bank of Nigeria. Two of his recent books are The Split Economy, St. Paul Goes to Wall Street, and The Split Time, Economic Philosophy for Human Flourishing in African Perspective. Please join me in welcoming Professor Nimi Wariboko. And I want to thank our partners. We advertised some of the activities of the Thabo Mbeki School. They've also been talking about leadership, challenges of leadership, and also training a generation of new African leaders. We're very grateful that they are partnering with us. We also have to thank our partners because we're streaming this conversation to various stations, radio and TV. We're streaming to Telegram, to YouTube, Facebook. We use this Zoom as a streaming device to reach thousands of people. We are very grateful to you all. Let me ask the first question, sir. Professor, Professor Moghalu, can you tell us the history behind this new school? Can we start with that?
Thank you, Professor Falola. Thank you, Professor Wariboko, for having me on this program. And I'm hoping that Lerato Mbele will join us as soon as possible. The African School of Governance is the vision of two outstanding African leaders who put heads together to discuss the governance and leadership challenge that Africans have been facing, and decided sometime in 2022, that's about 2 years or 2.5 years ago, that the best way to address the governance and leadership deficit in Africa is to create a new country of leaders who are trained with a certain type of mindset, knowledge, and skills to be able to address the challenges that Africa will face and continue to face in the 21st century, as well as opportunities that the continent will have. How do we respond to those opportunities? So these conversations took place between the president of Rwanda, His Excellency President Paul Kagame, and the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency Haile Mariam Desalegn. When they had their initial conversation and agreed on the vision, the next thing was to bring in other partners. So they brought in a number of African, very high-level scholars and leaders, and they set up the African School of Governance Foundation. And then the foundation did the groundwork towards the establishment of the African School of Governance itself. And then the foundation recruited me as president of the ASG so that the school could become operational. So this is the background, and a lot of this work has been done. Of course, even before, there were a number of foundational partners selected by the two leaders to work with in the establishment of the ASG. One was MasterCard Foundation, which has a program called the Young Africa Works program. And so it established a partnership between the ASG and the MasterCard Foundation. The second very foundational partner is the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy of the National University of Singapore, in Singapore. So these were the two foundational partners with whom a lot of the planning for the school took place, as well as a number of consulting firms, professional services firms, to help with managing money, to help with strategy, to help with publicity, to help with recruitments of the initial core of the university, of the school. So this is the background. And so I was appointed as president following a globally competitive process that was widely advertised. I was selected as the inaugural president of the ASG, and I was appointed in October 2024. And since then, we have set to work very actively without losing a beat. We have already hired our top executive management team. We have officially launched the African School of Governance. We did that a few days ago on the 14th of January. And we are now recruiting faculty, and we have now launched the recruitment of the students of the first cohort, who we expect in September 2025. So this is the early history and the recent history, as I recall.
Thank you, sir. Professor Wariboko, can you ask a set of questions on issues around leadership in Africa?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Professor Falola, that you've given to me. And also like to thank Professor Moghalu for coming on the show. In the introduction, I don't think you mentioned that he was a deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. So that is when I first met him at the CBN, if you remember that. He was a deputy governor, so I followed his career since then. So I'm happy to talk with you, sir. I want to ask a very fundamental question. Does Africa has a leadership problem or a followership problem or an economic system design problem? I ask this question because oftentimes this is leadership or followership, but as an economist, you know that the way a system is designed, an economic is designed could create or move that economy forward or move it backwards, right? So does Africa has a leadership problem, a followership problem, or a system design, especially economic design problem?
I believe that Africa has, at its most fundamental, a leadership problem. You see, leadership is the single most powerful determinant of social and economic progress. And so when you talk about economic system design, it is leadership that is competent, that can develop an economic system that works. Leadership that has the conceptual soundness, the practical rigor and discipline, and the implementation ability through governance that can design workable economic systems. That's number one. Number two, you talk about followership problem. Yes, Africa also has a very deep followership problem. But again, I think this goes back to the leadership problem, because when you don't have the right kind of leadership, such leadership may not be able to recognize the importance, or they may not have the altruism, that is the selflessness, to understand that an educated, politically and economically educated population, a literate population, is important for the society's very progress. If you have leaders who feel that they benefit by staying in power as absolutists for as many years as possible, based on the ignorance and the timidity of their populations, you may have a followership problem, yes, but this problem arises from a leadership problem. A leadership that is visionary and wants to transform Africa will empower and educate Africans, their citizens.
Yeah, thank you for that brilliant answer. But if you are in a leadership school, great. So I studied economics, then veered to the economic ethics side, because I realized that, these ethical issues in Africa, the kind of things you said, are very important if we want to develop Africa. But let's say we think along that line to systematically think about what are the ways to enact a change in Africa. Is it the question, let's say you you are given the authority to do something in Africa, will you focus in order to change people's behavior, both the leaders and the followers? Will you focus on designing an economic system that will bring the best out of people, or we focus on morally reforming people? Because that debate is in Africa. Or is corruption, is these people, leaders who are absolutists. So do we focus on moral reformation, whatever way we define morality or ethical reformation, or do we say that if we, as a leader, if I can create a kind of a system, a design, a political and economic system, assuming that we're starting from where you did, the leaders are important, but then once that leader is in office, does it focus on reforming people or designing system? Because I asked this question because it's at the heart of what Adam Smith was talking about, the wealth of nations. He said, it's not by the benevolence of the baker that we have our bread, but by his selfish motion. So if you design the capitalist system in a way, it will deliver the goods for economic development, even if people focus on their self-interest. In the same way, Aristotle handled this kind of conversation we're having 450 years before Christ, and he said, if you want to develop the Greek society, he said, we need to focus. He wrote a book called Nicomachean Ethics on virtues and transformation of individual, but he wrote the next book on polity, to saying that how you design the political system and everything is so important that you cannot just reform people if the system itself keep reproducing certain kind of people or allowing certain kind of people. So let's say you have the magic wand and you are a president of a school. So a leader is there. What should he or she focus on? Is it on the moral reformation of the people, or on redesigning a system that will create the necessary incentives for people to develop Africa, or people to become the best that they can be?
Well, thank you for the question. You might want to look at it as a chicken and egg problem, because both are very important. Systems matter, but values and ethics matter. But I find from my own interrogation and my practical experience, and I certainly think that is the path we will be taking in the African School of Governance, that the foundation of every society is having selfless leaders, is having leaders who are, who have certain values and ethics. And then plans can be made and executed based on those foundations that everybody understands, or that everybody has been educated to understand. These are the governing values. And then you place systems on top of those values. If you do not do that, and you just move to create systems, you will find that the absence of values and ethics will sabotage the best system. This is what I have seen. And I have seen this in many dimensions. I've seen it as a senior policymaker in Africa. I've seen it as an intellectual who has been an academic as well. I've seen it as a politician. I was once a politician, briefly, very briefly. But at least I also entered that terrain. And in that terrain, I came face to face with the fundamental reality of the African condition. There is no philosophical worldview in African societies. And without that, we cannot make progress. And that is why at the African School of Governance, we believe not only in training people in skills and knowledge, but also in the mindsets, creating those driven leaders. It is with that sense of purpose that, and with the skills and with the knowledge. Do you know what? In Africa today, we are where we are not because we don't have brilliant people. It's not because we don't have people with skills. It's not because we don't have people with knowledge. We do. But the problem is the mindset of leadership. And that's why we are where we are. The right mindsets have not yet been created and, developed to scale so that enough people, those mindsets with them into positions of authority and leadership. You can see a few countries where that is different. One of them is Rwanda, where I currently am. There is a certain type of mindset that is driving this country. In some other countries in Africa, you will also see that there is a certain type of mindset. In Botswana, for example, you see something to that effect. So it's a combination of systems and ethics and values. But if you don't set the values as a foundation, if you don't set a point of departure that everybody can be educated to believe in, look at America, look at Asia, look at Europe. What is the difference between America and China? A philosophical worldview that is different, subjective, but consistently applied inside their societies has delivered transformation, whether in China or whether in the United States or Europe. So this is a very important point. I can elaborate a little bit more on this if necessary, but this is my position.
Thank you. Let me come in and let me thank the media who are here with us, Punch, Guardian, Tribune. We are very grateful. And I can't wait for how you are going to reflect on this conversation, starting from your news item tomorrow. So I used to be on the board of the Thabo Mbeki Leadership School, which is now the Thabo Mbeki School. And part of the emphasis was that why don't we go back to past history and teach African political thought, beginning from indigenous leadership thought, moving through organic intellectuals like Black Biden. What did they say? What did Du Bois say? What is your view on integrating organic indigenous leadership thought into the contemporary ideas and this new school? Thank you.
It is not a matter of a view. It is the vision on which the African School of Governance is built, because we will teach African history, including indigenous African political thought. We will teach homegrown innovations in governance across Africa, cultural practices that can be used to organize societies, innovative practices that can be used to organize societies for productivity, that have not been heard about a lot in the continent and in the world. We talk a lot about Africa's problems, but Africa also has a lot to teach the world without denying our problems. So we will teach African history. In fact, the ASG will have a Center for African History and Leadership as one of its 4 research centers. The others are the Center for Homegrown Innovations in Governance. Then we will have the Center for Trade and Pan-African Integration. And then we will have a Center for Technology and Governance, or the use of technology in governance. So that's why I said it's not a view. It is the foundation of the African School of Governance.
Thank you, and I can confirm, because I've been contacted to look for a professor of history for you, so I can confirm what you just said. Professor Wariboko, please.
Thank you. But before we pick up on this indigenous leadership talk, wanted to continue the conversation on the economic ethics of business rights. So this issue of teaching Africans, giving them a mindset, and I sincerely agree with you, competition is mindset versus mindset. So I sincerely agree with you. But the issue is, for instance, how do we think our economic department of business schools, or even in the university, should be redesigned? Because it's like everybody cannot come to your school. It's not there. So part of the curriculum system in the university, how our courses design in a way that these issues about values and ethics, I sincerely believe we cannot build a civilization without an ethical foundation. And that's why somebody like me switched from studying main economics to say economic ethics. How do that those kinds of things matter for Africa's economic development? So how should this thing percolate through the university system? Because it cannot be a one-off thing. People do it only in the MBA program or in your school. So how should even economics department, economics curriculum, business school, and even other places like history be redesigned so that this issue of morality and values that are relevant for Africa's development is something that is taught at many levels in many disciplines, so it becomes what everyone coming out of African school at least is exposed to that. So in what way will your organization lead in that kind of reformation in Africa?
We have not just the master's degree programs, the Master of Public Administration. We also have executive programs, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, short courses for very busy practitioners. And also, those practitioners could be university professors as well. There's nothing that stops us from interacting with people who teach in MBA schools and infusing this element. Let me tell you, as a central banker, one of my problems was with economic thinking in Africa. Economic thinking in many African countries is full of received wisdom that doesn't work. Everybody and their uncle in Africa are capitalists, but they don't even understand that capitalism is a philosophy. At its foundation, it is a philosophy, and it has its ethics. Now, they don't even understand that the debate between shareholder capitalism, which is Adam Smith, and stakeholder capitalism, which is a discussion of what is the relationship between business, the state, and the society. Because business does not exist in its own. The economy does not exist on its own. It's all part of the society. And the society is regulated by the state or the structure of the state. So the problem we have in economic management in Nigeria and many African countries is the emptiness vis-a-vis philosophy that we see in economic management. And so they just go and paste all these IMF programs. You know, there's no deep thinking. There is no philosophical understanding. What type of society? So I believe, and this is what we will be doing at ASG, we will be taking our students to the foundations, to the worldviews of economic transformation, with the mindset. Listen, what is a worldview? Let me begin by discussing the difference between the Chinese and the Asians generally, and the Westerners. In China and Asia, their worldview rests on a relationship with time that believes that time is endless and everything is connected. So they have a natural ability for a long-term vision to plan and to implement. They're not in a hurry, but they are consistent. That comes from Zen Buddhism and many other religious practices. The second aspect of the Asian worldview is that society, that order, discipline, and stability is an end in itself. It is not a means to an end. Then the third plank of their worldview, moving from this element, is that the society is more important than the individual, because it is more important for order to exist, for stability to exist. That's the Asians. Let's come to the West. The Western worldview has developed over centuries, and it is anchored on three things. individual human rights. Individual human rights. The West reifies the individual. The East subordinates the individual to the whole. In the West, they believe in scientific innovation as the driver of prosperity. And third, they believe in institutions that check on untrammeled. So these are two different types of worldviews. Now, let me define a worldview. A worldview is the interaction between the inner world of our minds and the environment among us, in which we dwell, and the relationship between the two. It is a map of the world and our path through the world. It's a worldview. Every individual has it. I have mine, and I don't leave home without it, just like my American Express card. So it's always in my back pocket. And if you deal with me, you will know. If you deal with the American, you will know. If you deal with the Asian, you will know. So this worldview, I don't want to go into a deep philosophical thing here, but there are people who have studied worldviews and broken it down into 7 components. So you have to have this sense of, where are you coming from? Where are you going? How do you intend to get there? What is your value system? What is your theory of action, which is to say, what's your strategy? What's your knowledge base? These are the elements of a worldview. And as it is with individuals, so it is with nations. African countries have not come to this level of interrogation. They're just busy copying and pasting for now. So until you come to this level, attempt to design a system, whether political, constitutional, economic, that is not resting on a philosophical foundation, will collapse like a pack of cards. And in the African school of governance, the new generation will be training of leaders in this continent. We will be training them with this reality squarely in our minds.
A comment on what you said, then a question about leadership also. Maybe then, I don't know if Falola would move to, Professor Falola will let us move to another place. Yeah, so I sincerely understand the need and the passion for the worldview. So that is also my major passion. So exactly as Professor Falola would tell you, I published my book on split time. Is exactly drawing from African indigenous economic philosophy as a basis of, but I didn't generalize. I focus on one group so that we can see how one African group did it, the collaborators of the Jaws, that is on economic philosophy, and link that to how we can go about with development today. That is the book Split Time. Then I have another book called Life Making, a Political Philosophy. How do they organize society in a way that promoted human flourishing and life? So I understand that. So to come back to the issue of indigenous things and political development, do you think democracy by electing people to the office is the best way to go about developing Africa politically, or to go about this, right? And the reason why I ask this question, I'm not disparaging democracy. I believe in democracy. I believe in that. But is there a way to organize it? And the reason why I say so, that in 2022, September, I wrote an essay called Election by Lottery. That, yeah, do we go all the way by democracy, or we open up some part of it for a lottery system, just like the way it's done in Ireland? The part of their legislation is open. There's a movement. And Kofi Annan, just before he died, gave elections trying to say, we should rethink the way election and democracy. And he began to support this idea of election by lottery, because when they go back to traditional African, so like Ethiopia, they used to have that system of of getting leaders. So it's an indigenous stuff. And Kofi Annan began to advocate it. And I wrote a newspaper essay on it in September 2017. So my question is, we're talking about leadership. Is democracy in Africa giving us the right kind of leaders that we need? Or do we need to think about tweak democracy in a way that it suits more of our African indigenous thought and concepts?
Well, thank you, Nimi. I'm not going to let you get away with quoting your books without showing you one of mine. This is Emerging Africa.
Yes.
How the global economy's last frontier can prosper and matter, in which I developed this argument about how Africa can economically transform itself from the foundation of a philosophical worldview that we then apply to everything that we're doing, whether it's to capitalism, to foreign investment, to finance and capital markets, to world trade, to innovation and technology, but there's a philosophical strand that runs through. So we need to develop that. So just to finish that thought, but to come to your question, I believe that democracy, as it is practiced, has largely failed Africa. That doesn't mean that the idea of democracy itself is wrong or bad, not at all. But you see, every country is democratic in its own way. In America, that sees itself, by the way, their worldview is that they are the shining city on a hill. They are God's own country, the land of the free, the home of the brave. And everybody is indoctrinated with this from childhood. So propaganda plays a very important role in worldviews and how they seep through society, and the citizens then own it and do everything based on it. So propaganda is not always a dirty word. Now, but back to that later. So democracy, as it is currently practiced, is not the issue. What is the issue is this: that it is for every African country to choose how it wants to organize itself, to govern itself for stability and for economic productivity. So you find, for example, that in Ghana, in Senegal, in Kenya, in South Africa, in Botswana, they are, with not perfectly, but more or less, hewing closer to the traditional multi-party democracy that we have received from the West. But what matters is not what you choose. What matters is that it works in practice and delivers a good quality of life for the people. In Nigeria, sometimes they call it dividends of democracy. You see? So, but back to the idea that democracy is different. It's different in America. It's different in the United Kingdom. It's different in France. It's different in Germany. It's different in Japan. This is the reality. So why must Africa feel that they must copy and paste some Western paradigm without interrogating itself as to what do its citizens really want? So,
Thank you very much. Let me ask the last question on this segment.
Yes.
And I'll build it around what I call conventions.
Yes.
And I've been making this argument for a long, long time, that all societies have their conventions. They are not written down in the Constitution. They don't exist in the law books. But they have a way in shaping politics and governance. For instance, when Obasanjo was there, we call him Baba, and there was one time he took a cane and was beating police officers publicly. Not as enshrined in the Constitution that you can beat a police officer, but enshrined in the convention that an elderly person can discipline a younger person. That is just one example. When our colleagues from South Africa criticize Zulu, I give a talk there saying, Zuma. There are moments when Zuma was seeing himself as a king, not as a president. Drawing from Zulu conventions of governance, there are so many examples one can give. Even under Buhari, there are people, Sai Baba, treating him not within the boundaries of constitutions, not within the boundaries of democracy, but within the boundaries of conventions. So where do we put this? It's different from ethics and morality because they're not moral issues. They're just convention issues. That if I go to Obasanjo, I will prostrate. That's not in the Constitution. I should prostrate for the head of state. But that's just Yoruba culture that is older than me. It's unlikely you find in any African system where these conventions do not create their own pressure. They do. So first, how do we recognize them? And when you are saying democracy is not something that fits all countries, that there's no one definition of it, not one practice, how do we recognize that ethic conventions, Igbo conventions, right, must be part of the instrumentalities of governance? Yeah.
The fundamental problem of the modern African state, again, I come back to the African School of Governance and why we want to give a lot of play and importance to this matter of homegrown innovations in governance across Africa. The fundamental problem of the modern African state is that the state exists in two realities that are running in parallel. There is the official state governed by the Constitution and the laws. Then there is the traditional state governed by a very different reality, governed by our culture. Now, at the African School of Governance, we want to go into some thinking and research and training as to how these two can come together. Because we think that this is what Africa needs. And it is the absence of this, commingling or this, proper harnessing that is making the African state dysfunctional. You have leaders who are operating within a constitution, but psychologically are in the 19th century culture of the Gabiesi or the emperor or the Obi or the Igwe. And so this is one of the reasons why we have not been able to design a system of accountability for our leaders. And our leaders are bigger than the state. Because this goes back to what, if you want to use the English history, you would call the divine right of kings. I remind you, you are one of the greatest historians in the world, Professor Falola. And I don't need to remind you that a civil war was fought in England because of the pressure to create parliament as an organ to check the king. The civil war was fought. So how we resolve these tensions between the ancient and the modern, and the corruption of the modern and the ancient to serve selfish interests, because this is also one of the problems. It is not, I saw before we started this program, it looked as if the average reign or time in office of most African leaders was something between 20 and 30 years at a certain time in our history. Now, the problem is not how long they stayed in office. My problem is, what did they achieve? It's the issue. So, for example, I come back to Rwanda. You will say In fact, when I looked comparatively, President Kagame has been in office for about 23 or 24 years. And I said, this man is looking very young compared to those who have been in office for 40 years, 38 years, 35 years, and so on. But the real point is that if you visit Rwanda and you remember the genocide 30 years ago, and if you knew what Rwanda was like then, and you see what Rwanda is like now, you will see the impact of transformation and transformative leadership. Yes, there's been longevity, but there have been results that cannot be disputed. So for me, it's not how long, but how well. So that's what I would say, that in the ASG, we do want to go into this matter of the parallel state in which we live. The role of traditional rulers in governance is very important. I believe that traditional rulers should play a formal institutional advisory role to governments. And I believe that they should not be appointed by political authorities.
Thank you very much. Can we move? Okay, Professor Wariboko, go ahead.
I do agree with what Professor Moghalu has said about leadership. But for me, the idea that it doesn't matter how long a person stays in office, as long as you are delivering some goods, fundamentally rubs against the idea of governance or democratic governance, right? In the sense that one of the fundamental idea of democracy is ruled and be ruled.
Yes.
Ruled and be ruled means that you can rule, then another person can rule, and therefore you are also under the authority of a ruler. So it matters that when we philosophize about that, we don't throw that away. No matter how good you are, you don't have a monopoly of intelligence, of knowledge. So if you cannot raise successors to even be better than you, and so it becomes a matter of democracy now becomes a kingship where a dynasty where you stay till you die. For me, yes, somebody could be good, but no matter how good you are, like George Washington step aside, Mandela step aside. See, that is very, very important that philosophically we think about this thing. Democracy, define it as a government for the people, by the people, for the people. That is important, but if you go back to the original debate, like the way Aristotle and others had it, this principle is important. Democracy must involve the idea that be ruled, rule and be ruled. If that is broken because you are the best intelligent, because democracy is not defined by aristocracy, by wisdom, by intelligence. It just means that everyone is equal and must be given a chance to contribute to the solution. So I want us to, this is important in the way we understand democracy.
Nimi, let me explain something. I was not suggesting otherwise, that anyone should be beyond accountability to his or her people. That's not the point. I want to take you back to Singapore. How many years did Lee Kuan Yew stay in office? He was in office for about 30 years. He was being re-elected by his people. So the fact that somebody stays long in office, if his or her people want him or her and are re-electing the person or giving the person a mandate, it is also legitimate. It may not fit into your 4-year time span. By the way, most Asian countries that achieved transformation under long-term rule of some sort or the other. That's a historical fact.
As in the case of China.
Yes.
3 leaders since Mao transformed an entire country. But the problematic is that in a plural society like Nigeria
is not a democracy. I'm sorry.
But explain that.
Good. I want to explain something. Nigeria is a plutocracy. It is not a democracy. Let me explain what I mean. In a plutocracy, a group of people who are powerful, have a lot of money, are of a higher status than the rest of the society, especially in the political system. And capture power in a systemic way and recycle themselves in office through ritualistic elections. But the people themselves are not empowered because they're hungry and they're poor and their votes are being bought. They are mainly illiterate, so they're not voting on the issues. They're voting based on ethnic sentiments. They're voting based on religion.
Are you describing the United States or Nigeria?
Yes, it's not only in Nigeria. I was going to say that it's not only in Nigeria. Since you talk about the United States, you have the Electoral College. That is not a democratic principle, but they have put the Electoral College for their own cultural reasons, where somebody could win the popular vote in a presidential election and lose the election because somebody else won the Electoral College. So there are many contradictions in many countries. I only gave you the example of Nigeria, and it is the same in many African countries. Now, if an electoral umpire, we know in Nigeria that nobody has any real belief or trust or respect, for INEC as a conductor of elections. Nobody trusts it to deliver the real results. So there's a problem of legitimacy. So when you say democracy, oh, this is a democracy, this one is not because the leader has stayed for many years, I think we're deceiving ourselves. And that is why we need to come back to the foundations and interrogate our systems across Africa, including in Nigeria. That's why we're having a conversation about the constitutional restructuring of Nigeria. But some people who are in office shy away from it. Some people promote it. When they're in office, they run away from it so that they can remain in office. So this tendency to avoid self-interrogation of our system, I think, is not helping us because it creates just running around in circles, and it's not good for us. Yeah.
I just somebody just joined us, additional, who was President Buhari's press secretary. Hopefully, he will make his own contribution when we invite members of the audience. Let us move to the economy.
Yes.
So, Deputy Governor, Central Bank, and Nimiwari Boko, you may not be aware, he was also at some point nominated to become the governor of the Central Bank. So let me start with a controversial question. I have made the argument that many people in Nigeria, people like pastors, Geo, they don't understand economics 101. So we have a population that do critique, but without understanding how economy works, without understanding distribution, the role of the state. What do you think, and I'm asking the two of you now, what is the role of the central bank itself in all these various African countries in creating instruments of development? Is that what they're supposed to do?
Good question. Now, one of the first things I realized as a central bank governor was what I described, without intending to be rude, as massive economic illiteracy in many of our countries in Africa, including in Nigeria. And that illiteracy sometimes starts at the very top, at the highest levels of leadership. There is no understanding of economics, whether micro or macro. And these are the people who are taking decisions. Economy is run by a number of economic institutions. It's not just the central bank, but the central bank is standalone as a public statutory corporation in Nigeria. And so it's quite strong as an institution. And because it takes decisions on interest rates, monetary policy, it takes decisions on the payment system, the banks, how you move money around. It takes decisions on various issues that affect people's pockets directly. Many people look up to the central bank as the only economic policy-making organ, and this creates a problem. The first problem it creates is that it gives the fiscal authorities that are in charge of taxation, that are in charge of debt and debt management, that are in charge of revenues, it gives them a pass. And those institutions, as in Nigeria, have been very weak, while the central bank is strong. This creates an imbalance, and so the economy never performs optimally while this is the case. Remember that there are two other sides of the economy. One side is national planning, which is the sort of the philosophical engine room that should plan the economy as a whole. Then you have the aspect of industrial policy, that is industries, trade, investment, and all that. So these four areas should work together. But the central bank should be independent. So I told Governor Sanusi once that, you know, Governor, in the Bank of England, immediately after the Monetary Policy Committee, the members of the committee flew out to all aspects, all areas of England, granting radio interviews, granting television interviews, educating the citizens of the implications of 1-point movement in the interest rate, the monetary policy rate, or whatever decision they've taken. And that we should do this more in Nigeria to educate Nigerian citizens on economics and on monetary policy. So that's what I would say. We need a lot more economic education. And that's why at the African School of Governance, nobody will graduate through here without a comprehensive understanding of economics for public policy, economic development, and other aspects of economic thought and practice.
Please, Professor Wariboko, in addition to that question, now I'm interviewing you too now. Should a poor country like Nigeria spends a lot of its foreign reserves on medical tourism, school fees abroad, because the component from the figures we've seen is so high? I was surprised when the war broke out in Ukraine that we have over 10,000 students there. There was no way I would have known that. I was surprised when the war broke out in Sudan that we have over 5,000 students there. I know about Togo and Ghana. Should we be spending as scarce resources on that? Or should we use this money for manufacturing industrial capacities? Are we serving a small elite at the expense of the majority of our population?
Well, if you put it that way, yes, to the extent that these people, these students, their parents are sourcing some of the money through the central bank system to pay the school fees. Yes, so it's diverting, but some of them, their parents got the money independently and they're spending it. Some of them, when they're on their own and they're working and they're paying their way. So it's like in the US, I saw a statistics yesterday, we have 17,000 Nigerian students. I saw those that they're talking about who got the visa, student visa to come there. But if you look at Nigeria, that's where there are more. So yes, so the issue is every parent wants the best for their child, right? If they have the money and if the central bank is willing to sell them, they will buy. If they're willing to make money elsewhere, they will. So in a democratic free society, I won't begrudge a parent for doing that. But there's something that we can do. So the question comes to incentive, right? If our leaders, coming back to what Professor Moghalu said, if you build a good school where students in Nigeria can get equivalent level of education, at least at the undergrad, there will be no incentives for them to go out. It's much more expensive. But if you don't have a system and the parent can afford it, then we cannot make the tell the parent that you cannot educate your child outside when we know that today if you're educating any child, the education is only for Nigeria. Every child you're educating is globally competing with every other child in the world. Because when a job open up, everybody's going to apply. Professor Moghalu is a Nigerian. A job opened up. Who is going to lead the institution? He said it was a global search, right? And it was picked. So any child, this issue, whether you are Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, doesn't matter. In the global scale, the children we are producing will compete with the Chinese, with the American, with the Russian, with the Indian to get the jobs, the good jobs that are available. So yeah, a parent has an incentive. Now, so do we build a system, the good education system that would stem that process? Yes. Do we, as a rule, I don't know if it's democratic to implement it, that if you are in office, do we say you can send your child abroad? Or if you choose to be a public officer, a legislator, a governor or so, do we make a rule that your children must school in Nigeria? Maybe that will at least enable some of them to create some good institution. You don't need to have every institution to be good, but then that will infringe on their democratic right, or the democratic right of a child who is over 18 to go anywhere to study. But this has been giving me thought, right? Or how do we create a system? Like if you look at the elite educational system in America, the Ivy League, in England, the Oxbridge, in India, the MIT, they set up, right? So they say, look, we cannot develop everybody to the best level, but can we create pockets of excellence? And that's why India did with this massive investment into computer and technology. So it comes down to, why can't we create an educational system in Nigeria that people can get the best of education in Nigeria? If you address that problem, you see, it will solve that the kind of hemorrhage of our research. That's what I'm talking about, incentive system and designing the system. Instead of we focusing on whether the parents are patriotic, we are wasting money. We ask the question, what gives them the incentives to go abroad? It's because we don't have a good working system education. That is important, but they also send their children abroad, not only to get education, saying that if my child goes there, when he or she finishes her education, he can get a job. So even if you have the best education in Nigeria, but you don't pay attention to what jobs people are going to get in Nigeria, I might still send my child abroad to give him a head start so that he goes to school and he gets a job. So we must allow him not only good education, but are there opportunities being created for the young ones when they finish to stay in the country or want to stay in the country? Because this is the issue I have. I talk with a lot of all these big men that have their children abroad, and some of them, I'm here for a long time. They will say, can my child stay with you? Can you act as a guardian while my child is here? And I will tell you, over 95% of the time, when I talk to those children of those wealthy Nigerians, they don't want to go back to Nigeria. Even their father has all the wealth, their parents. There's something going on because they see that the country is not functioning. They would rather stay here. But they say, if you go back to Nigeria, your father has money, you can live a good life. No, they don't want to stay because they feel life is insecure, or they feel they won't get the professional development that they will get. So you see, there are many things that are fueling this issue of our people going abroad and we're spending money. We are also exporting our brain power through those children that are living. So that's why, as he said, we need a leader who can see the picture in this way and say, how do I begin to create an economy that will make my people study here and also study? When I was an undergrad, I will end there. My economy professor, we are doing regional economics, right? Regional economy. And he said one thing, he said, if you design an economy well, he said, everybody would find what they need within their region, their state, both for education and for job. And that, I was in Nigeria, that sounded strange because you have to go to school in Port Harcourt, you go to Lagos to get a job. You have to go to school in Kano, you go to Lagos to get a job. But when it comes to America, I find people in the state of Massachusetts, they are 40 years old, they've never left the state. And their life is accomplished. They get the best education and they get jobs. Some of them have not even. I met a woman she's from New Hampshire, next state to my associate. She said she has not been to New York. She was 45. I met her in Turin for the first time because she didn't need to. She can get good education, good job, live a flourishing life without leaving the region where she is. But our system is been so messed up that people think that if I'm born in Port Harcourt, I should leave Port Harcourt to go and look for my fortune in Lagos or Onisha. Yes, some people may want to do that, but we should design a system where individuals can flourish wherever they are in their region, and the whole country that way is growing, and we are carrying everybody along.
Thank you, Professor Moghalu. So, because this is the economic segment, corruption, why do we keep talking about it?
First of all, I want you to know that corruption is a global problem. There's corruption everywhere in the world. It's simply a matter of degree. In many countries that are doing well economically and socially, corruption is at the periphery. But in countries like Nigeria, corruption is at the center. And that is why it's so dangerous for us in Nigeria, because it is really eating our lunch and eating our destiny. So the reason it's at the periphery in other countries or in many other countries is as follows. In this country where I am right now, in Rwanda, almost zero tolerance for corruption. Corruption is very low here. So this question of values, ethics, discipline, again comes back to the fore. The reason it's at the periphery in many countries is as follows. One, accountability. Every human nature is sinful. Given the space, people will play a fast one. But if the system works in such a way that if you're corrupt and you're found out, you suffer in terms of jail or serious severe punishment. In some places like China, you could get killed, as legal punishment for corruption. So that's number one. Number two is that you have to have the example of leadership. Leadership that is not corrupt has a lot more legitimacy to impose accountability for corruption, has a lot more chance of being believable and believed by people when they speak against corruption. And then the third reason is that the educational system, the worldview of many advanced societies is anchored on a high standard of values and ethics, backed up by accountability, backed up by leadership example. This is the triangular foundation of a society that does not tolerate corruption. The reason we talk about it a lot in Nigeria is that none of these three things exists. The values and the ethics as a foundation are not there. That's why when I ran for president, I said that if I were to become president, I would make the teaching of ethics in all institutions in the country compulsory, from primary school at a very simple level to secondary school, more sophisticated. And after that, you can go into university or tertiary education. But there's a foundation of knowledge of what is right and wrong and the consequences of each. So that's the problem. That's why, and it distorts the whole economic system, because when there's a lot of corruption, the systems are not functioning in a transparent way, and it creates problems for business, investment. That's part of the reason the economy is, where it is today.
I see he has joined us as a dean of the law school in a South African university. And President Mbeki also worked on this illicit flow of money. And they began to calculate it in South Africa. And they reached a figure of 88 billion US dollars every year. That $88 billion every year just will leave our continent. So where does this leave us? Because irrespective of what you do in your school and what we all talk about, if we continue to lose 88 billion US dollars every year as a continent, where does this leave us?
There's one question I need to ask you before I answer your question. Where is the $88 billion going?
Western societies.
Okay.
Out
so
of Africa.
That is why I said there's corruption everywhere. But the consequence of leadership failure in Africa is that it is so much worse for us because we have not built up our systems. There's corruption in the United States, but there's water, light, electricity, 24 hours. Lerato has not been able to join us on this interview from South Africa because the power system collapsed just before this program started in that where she is in that country. So the consequences for us are much worse, and so how do we get out of this? What we're trying to do at the ASG is not to pretend that Africa's problems will be solved tomorrow morning. No way. I was
told that Lerato has joined. If you have joined, please let's know.
Okay, that's great.
I just got a note. Please spotlight Lerato, please. Please continue. I apologize for the interruption. I just
No, that's fine. I'm happy to know that she has joined us, and I look forward to her questions.
Please spotlight her.
Yeah. So the point is that we in ASG believe that the next generation of leaders who will be trained over the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, if we create a critical mass and a pipeline across Africa, eventually change will begin to come in the leadership and policy-making structures. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a process.
Ralph, you're muted.
Yeah, no. I was looking for Lerato, but they say she has disappeared again. Professor Wariboko, please, on economy, before we move to the last segment.
Yes, okay, so I have a couple of questions on economy. And your last discussion about transferring 88 billion and the way the Professor Moghalu said that the West is corrupt, and that's why they are keeping our 88 billion money that they know was illicit, right? So that brings me to, I'll ask two questions, and you can respond to them. Do we need to redesign the global monetary system, the global trade and payment system, in a way that it will favor Africa? We know how the origin of it at the Bretton Woods and what happened, and we also know how Keynes wanted the Banco plan, which was supposed to be more democratic also, but they chose the American plan. So do we need to rethink the global trade and payment system in a way that is more favorable to Africa's economic development, or that doesn't matter at all, even though some African economy professors have talked about the design of the global monetary system? That is number one. Number two, and this is where China and Apple come in, do we still need to keep the US dollar as the global currency of reserve, or the main currency of global trade? Because China is thinking about that, Russia is thinking about that. So we are in the midst of a global change. So how do we go about for Africans to redesign the global monetary system that it will benefit us? Because yes, we know we have internal domestic monetary system, we have our own central bank system, but the way the global financial architecture is organized, the trade and payment system, the use of a few currencies as global currencies of reserves or trade do impact Africa. So how do you think African economies or a school like yours should also think about that global external dimension of Africa's economic development?
Quickly, both as a practitioner and as a scholar and a thought leader, that energy will be better put, our energies as Africans will be better put towards developing our internal economies to be competitive, rather than spending time beating down the door for anybody to reform the international monetary system. And you're waiting for Godot. It's like the argument about reforming the Security Council. There will be no permanent member of the Security Council outside of the current 5 that will have a veto power, assuming that they even allow for other permanent members, but there will be no other veto power. You can go to sleep with that reality. Power is power. The reason the global economy is structured the way it is because these developed countries created competitive economies that came to dominate the world. China has not spent time begging the West to create a new system. China has developed its own system and has internally risen to become a global power, now competing with the West. This is what should be the African worldview. This worldview of protesting against the West, it's a waste of time. Build your own system, make it work, create a competitive economy that exports value-added goods. You will come to be respected. Your currency will become more stable. These are facts. Now, coming to the challenge against the dollar, it's again an extension of the point we're discussing. The anarchy in the international system. The international system or the international society is a competitive space. There's a controlled anarchy. There is nothing like the international community, quote unquote. That is an aspiration. It is not a reality. So in this controlled anarchy, states are jostling for their own progress, their own rise in the rankings of global power. And this is the case economically. And this is the mentality behind the BRICS. And they are targeting to raise their own level of influence and to diminish the influence of the US and the dollar. But the influence has been based on economic reality. The US is the #1 economy in the world. That's a fact. So 60% of the world's foreign reserves are held in US dollars. It used to be 75%. So what this means is that there has been some sort of decline in US economic dominance. But will the rise of another currency, let's say a BRICS currency, will it lead to the destruction of the dollar? I don't think so. I don't think so. So there will be an uncomfortable coexistence, just like as a central bank deputy governor.
Please, let me stop you. We welcome Peter Obi, former presidential candidate, for joining us for this interview.
Thank you.
So you're free to ask questions later on, Peter.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
So as I was saying, the BRICS. I was talking about the dollar being 60% of the world's reserves. It may eventually drop to 50%. We don't know. But as a single currency, it will continue to be the most dominant. When I was in the central bank, we moved part of Nigeria's foreign reserves into the renminbi, and we were the first central bank in Africa to do so, if I remember correctly. It was our recognition of the realities of the global international economic order that China was a player that has come to stay. But China has a lot of obstacles to overcome before its currency can become the global currency reserve. You know, it needs to subject its economy to a lot more openness, the capital markets, so many reforms. And will it be willing to do that? I'm not so sure, because there's a political system behind China's economics.
Thank you. We'll move to the third segment on philosophy. So we are bringing next week a team of 4 people to talk about the impact of the Trump presidency. As many Africans are now writing their own stories, week after we are talking about biographies. And in February, we are bringing Dele Farotimi, the activist to talk about his experiences. So the next 3 weeks, please join us. Let's now come to philosophy. And I will use the opportunity of Peter Obi joining us to ask you the question. Suppose you won the election, what would you have done differently? Suppose you are the current president.
I think that, of course, I do not dwell in the world of hypotheticals, but when I ran for president, I had a vision which I put out to our country. And that vision is here. It's called Build, Innovate, and Grow, my vision for our country. So it was a very concrete plan, chapter by chapter. And there are many things I would have done differently, the first of which would have been the beginning of the mass education of Nigerians, politically and economically, to create unity of purpose, to create a worldview that we all share, a sense of destiny, a sense of common destination. I would have done that very differently. I do not believe in ethnic politics. And so when I ran for office, my campaign was not about ethnicity, it was about issues. And it was about a strategy for the transformation of the Nigerian state. I have left politics for the record. I have left politics. That is, one hair of my body cannot even be found in the political arena. So just to be very clear, in case anybody is thinking anything. So, but I don't have any regrets.
There's a rumor you want to become the governor of Anambra State.
Oh, no, that is not true at all. Yeah, even I have no interest in Nigerian politics. Let me just be clear. Not Anambra State, not presidency, not anything. I was interested in the presidency when I was interested in it. But I made my own personal decision to move on from the space and return to the areas where I felt I was more competitive. One of the reasons I made that decision was that I found out that there was a huge gap between where my mind was and where the people are. And I was not qualified. And in Nigeria, the biggest qualification you must have as a politician is to have a lot of cash. Now, I have always been, mostly in my life, a public servant. I did not steal one kobo anyway. So the only place I worked in Nigeria, most of my career was in the United Nations. The only place I worked in Nigeria was in the central bank. And I did not take one kobo that was not mine. If I did, you would have heard about it in the 2019 elections, because I did subject President Buhari and his government to a very stinking criticism, in terms of their performance. So I think you were saying, what would I do differently? Re-educating the Nigerian people would have been a prime priority. Electricity would have been a prime priority, because without electricity, you can do all the design, you can do all the thinking. Nigeria's economy will never achieve its optimal productivity without at least 40 to 50,000 megawatts of electricity.
Thank you. Professor Wariboko, leadership philosophy.
So the first question is, we all have our own biographies. So is there something in your upbringing, your experience, that have fashioned the way you think about governance, your worldview? What is it about the man, Professor Moghalu, that tells us about the kind of person he is today? What about your past that you want to share with our audience?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very profound and important question. And I think the roots of that go back to my parents. My father was a civil servant. He was first in the 60s, a Nigerian diplomat. He served in Geneva, he served in Washington, D.C., and then we returned just before the Civil War. And after the war, he remained in the state civil service and became a permanent secretary. He was a very honest man and had a reputation for probity, which made me very proud to be his son. Anywhere people knew that I was Isaac Moghalu's son, I saw the reception I received. Because, and my father would beat his chest. When we were young, he said, 35 years as a civil servant, I never took a bribe. I don't forget that. as a child, some things get stuck in your memory forever. And so as I was growing up, the legacy of my father weighed heavily in my mind. And I always remembered how he admonished me to continue with that legacy. Don't spoil it. Don't soil it. Remember who you are. Remember the name you carry. So this is a very important influence on how I approach public service, to be, to make as much difference in the lives of any organization, people that I come in contact with, and make anywhere I work better than I found it. That's what drives me.
Thank you.
But that raises a crucial philosophical question. Since your school also deals with philosophy of leadership itself.
Absolutely.
And this goes back to what Aristotle said. Aristotle said that you cannot raise an honest person in a corrupt society, or if you are born in a society, a cannibalistic society, the child probably will also be cannibalistic, knowing it is correct. So, but this goes back to the root of the problem. Many Africans will talk the way you talk, at least in your generation, how their father was, or in your father's generation, that they didn't know this issue of this corruption. So what is it about the culture and the context of the post-colonial Nigeria or Africa that kind of turn people away from the kind of upbringing that which most people say they had that, and they become totally different issue? Because Professor Falola knows, Peter Eke in Ibadan wrote these two forms of public, right? He was beginning to see it in the 70s, in the 60s, and wrote an article in the early 70s to say we have two public, that the way we behave towards those days, towards our ethnic groups or morality, we are honest. But once we are serving the public in the public place, we are completely different. So he began to see this bifurcation of morality, right? In the same way there's bifurcation of morality at home and also in the public. So what is it about the public square, about the context outside the homes, outside in those days, outside our ethnicity or moral or villages or so, that have completely failed us, that we have this kind of moral crisis in Africa?
And what I perceive, it has happened across the continent. And it is not unique to the continent. Today in America, there are people in public life who 20, 30 years ago, with their behavior, nobody would even pay them any serious attention. So there's been a universal decline of values in many countries. But in Africa, it has been so because the public space increasingly became divided between people who were professional, intellectual, educated, and people who were not, but managed to corner political power. This is certainly what happened in Nigeria. As the political space became dominated, remember that in the First Republic, it's not that there was no corruption, there was. But, Nzogu did a coup and talked about corruption. He should wake up today and see what's going on. And what would he have done? So the coup was unnecessary because that so-called corruption was just a minor thing. Most people in government in the 60s and in the 50s were people who were thinking people. We know that they were educated people, thinking people, intellectuals. But after the Civil War, especially from 1999, when the military had run us around in circles and people were no longer sure that there would be a democratic transition for real. So the intellectuals, the competent people were not interested. And a lot of 419 types of characters came into politics and managed to be successful. The massive degradation of the value system in the public space began with that. Now, you talk about how can you be straightforward in a corrupt society. One thing I'll tell you from personal experience, now I'm not trying to claim sainthood or anything, no. But the fact of the matter is that when you do not go with the flow, there is a heavy price to pay. And it's a matter of character, whether or not you are prepared to pay that price. In my own case, I am helped by the fact that other than the 5 years I worked for the central bank, I have never relied on Nigeria for my livelihood. I have always been an international and global professional. So this also helps because I know that I do not need the system, if you see what I'm saying, to survive. And I am more interested in maintaining the legacy that is personal to me than in joining the masses. Now, in my hometown, my Igwe Kenneth Orizu, conferred on me a very unique traditional title. And he gave me the title of Ifekego of Nnewi Kingdom. Now, if you know what that name, Ifekego, means, it means beyond money, bigger than money and material things, priceless. Now, in Nnewi, that is a big statement because it's a town that is very commercial, has a lot of billionaires. And when I was being conferred with the title, and I was announced to stand up and approach the Igwe, and they called the title, people were turning their heads. Ifekego, who on earth is that is bigger than money? It's like in their mindset, what sort of title is this? Then when they saw me, they said, oh, okay. Oh, we can understand this now. You see what I'm saying? They said, okay, this title fits you. And they, quote unquote, surrendered to the fact that there could be something or somebody that was, beyond money. So this is how the society functions. And it's a matter of strength of character, the choices we make in our lives. And I would encourage people, if you are minded to stand on the right path, please continue to do so and do not surrender. That's my own personal admonition.
Thank you very much. Hold on. In keeping to the time we negotiated with you, I will now turn to the members of the audience to make their comments and questions. You raise up your hands and we call you. I want to use this opportunity to thank our partners. We are streaming this live in 23 countries, and we have a tentative report, 4.5 million people are watching this program. And of those 4.5 million people, we pray that if only 0.2 of them take away some ideas from this, it will have been very successful. Dr. Wale Okedira, please turn on his video. We remove video because of Zoom bombers. But as people want to talk, we'll put Professor Wale Okedira used to be a Nigerian politician, a medical doctor, is now the Secretary General of the Pan-African Writers Association based in Ghana. Professor Dr. Okedira, you're a politician. You used to be a politician.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Falola.
Yes.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Moghalu, for the wonderful and expertly delivered lecture. I have just two questions. The first one is to say that, well, I think Professor Falola has already let the cat out of the bag. I was, for a few years, a member of the House of Reps, and I was able to have a first-hand information, experience about politics. And that's why I wanted to support Professor Wariboko's question on the issue of followership. Even though I appreciate your area of concentration on leadership, I still believe that we need to also do something about leadership and followership, Because when you are going to represent your people, and this is my own personal experience, you are usually given a list of things to do, a list of things that must be done on a very regular basis. Those people, those people you have to take care of, those issues you must do, the number of people you must send to Mecca for their um, religious pilgrimage, and the number of rams and chickens you must buy every Christmas for Ramadan. So the pressure from the people, from the followership is enormous, and we need to do something about it. The second thing again is to say, now I'm wondering how you want to extrapolate this your well-trained graduates into the system, knowing fully well that 80% of African politicians don't go to, I mean, are not well educated, with apologies to many of them. They don't understand most of the policies and the things you are going to teach in the African School of Governance. How does this impact into the kind of leaders that will us? Or your school is just there like a backup or like an academic pool to advise us? These are my questions. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kediran.
Yes, sir.
Can we, okay, I understand where you are going.
Yes.
Suppose they concentrate on bureaucrats. And bureaucrats stabilize a system. Because the idea in what we call democracy, any form of governance,
yes,
the idea is to say leaders will come and go.
Yes.
But you can train what we call civil servants that are stable. I know they will trample on them. Can a school like this not focus on that stability? Not necessarily those who become presidents and governors, but those who run the system.
Yes, that's a good idea. In fact, the African Leadership Forum, run by former President Obasanjo, used to have this kind of discourse for supportive staff at the National Assembly. And your inputs on the civil servants are also very important, because evidence have shown that unlike what we think, the majority of the corruption happening in Nigeria is at the level of the civil service. So maybe if you want us to train them, but for me, the practitioners of politics in Nigeria, who are supposed to be our future leaders, may not directly benefit from this kind of approach. So we still need to find a way of taking care of that. That is my own solution.
My suggestion, sir, Professor Moghalu, can you write down some of these questions and comments? It allows you to rest and just cluster the questions in some ways. I just saw entering the head of the Ahmadiyya movement, Sheikh Momo. I'm very happy that a religious figure of that standing has joined us for this conversation. Thank you. Professor Rotimi Jayesimi, comments, questions? Professor Rotimi Jayesimi, where are you based? Where are you calling from?
Good evening. I'm joining you from the United Kingdom, England. And this is a wonderful seminar which has addressed most of the things that I think is wrong with Nigeria. I think the bottom line is, at the moment, corruption has been normalized in Nigeria. So when you train civil servants or future leaders, it's probably not going to change until we have penalties for corrupt people. Professor Moghalu, thank you for a wonderful exposition. You took us to the Americas, you took us to China, you even took us to traditional rulers. And more recently, we heard about what happened or what is happening in Oyo, where they're trying to install a new king. And corruption is even playing a part in that. So, just to summarize what I want to say, until there is the penalty for corruption, we have a hard, long road to travel. And the problem we have is, who is going to legislate against it? Is it the current legislation? No, they wouldn't. They would not. They have used poverty to fight society. The masses don't know their rights. My honorable, I think maybe House of Rep or Senate, just said the expectation is to send them to Mecca to buy ram. Really? That's not what politics and democracy and governance is about. No, government has no reason buying rams or senators. So we need to reorientate ourselves. We
Thank
spoke
you.
about let
Thank
me
you.
just I
You made your
will end in
point.
a second.
Yeah, you made
I
your
will
point.
end in a second.
Yes.
We need to go back home. That is where ethics, values, and virtues start from. And Professor Moghalu alluded to that. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Dr. Sajo Madu, please forgive me if I don't pronounce your name very well. Dr. Sajo Madu. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and greetings to Dr. Professor Moghalu. I'm Dr. Sajo Madu, and most folks call me the bridge builder. And it's all about closing the gap between hierarchies, between humanities, between tribes, religion, and creeds, and even between humanity and divinity. I like the approach of the holistic human capital optimization that Professor Moghalu alluded to. I like the idea that change doesn't come from the millions of ants in a row. It comes from the lead ant. The change comes from not the millions of ants in a row. It comes from the lead ant. The leaders must also understand him from his title. Ifekego. Ifekego. Money can be counted. The money in your bank can be counted. It's quantifiable. But that name means what money cannot buy. Legacy is built on what money cannot buy. It's not built on money. Many folks aspire for eternity. Legacy is built on what money cannot buy. I challenge our leaders to make the change, and that change can be done. All of us listening here, I challenge each one of you to make a positive change. You can start by planting the seed of the change you desire. If you cannot do that, then all you're doing is listening. All we are doing is too much Turanchi, too much English, too much grammar, and it has not helped us. We must basically, if the Titanic is not moving, let's not rock it. Let's not shake it. Let's dump it. Change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and God bless.
Where are you calling from?
I'm the president of the U.S. Africa Chamber of Commerce in Dallas, Texas. And we believe in holistic human and natural capital capacity optimization.
Thank you very much. Sikiru Yusuf, your question, your comments, please.
I'm muted. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Toyin Falola, and of course, Professor Moghalu. My name is Sikiru Yusuf. I'm a grad student at the Florida International University here in Miami, Florida. So my question is to find out that what is the place of history in the conceptual framework of African School for Governance, given the fact that the whole idea of the challenges we've highlighted so far in terms of the corruption, leadership, followership, there is a historical background to all this. How do we incorporate this historical background to the conceptual framework of African School of Governance, such that we reflect on the past and begin to identify the gap where the missing links are, such that going forward, we can address those missing links such that we are not just running in a circle. That is my question, sir.
Thank you. And you know, he addressed this during his presentation. And at the moment, I'm part of the people that have been consulted to look for an historian for them. I think they've taken care of this in some ways. There is Temitope Fagunwa, is a Marxist. Temitope Fagunwa Do you want to issue some ideological clarification? Fagunwa is a hardcore Marxist. Fagunwa. Okay, Professor Richard Joseph. Are you there? Richard Joseph. Christopher Isike, the head of the school, the head of political science, University of Pretoria. Isike. Professor Isike. Christopher Isike. I think our technical people are finding it difficult to locate these people. Olalekan Ajia. Olalekan Ajia.
Yes, I said I'm here. I was muted. I'm only just allowed to speak. Can I talk?
Okay, let Fagunwa talk first, and then we come to you. I think.
All right.
I think we have technical partner. Our technical people are finding it difficult to locate people.
Hello,
Fagunwa.
Prof. Yes,
Yes.
I want to firstly thank the organizers, Prof, led by Professor Falola for this consistency, and also the guest lecturer for the explicit delivery. However, Prof, my worry really is about the economy. And I think ultimately, if we do not get the economy right, we will just be perambulating. We have been warned by Fela. We have been told, across the African continent, it is almost impossible for us to articulate an economic solution to our problem, by saying that, we shouldn't worry about, the capitalist monetary system, what is happening in the international, economic system, that it is no worry of ours. There is nowhere to which we can develop or we can build our own independent economic system if we are not wary of what is happening externally.
Thank you.
African economy exists. African economy exists.
Thank you. Your point has been made. The power of the dominant hegemonic forces. And I will ask him to respond to that because he was making the argument about China and Singapore. Professor Isike, I want to give many people the opportunity to talk. From the University of Pretoria, please go ahead.
All right. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, thank you very much to Professor Falola for organizing this as usual, and to Professor Moghalu for well-delivered lecture, even though I didn't hear all of it. My question is, leadership and governance, and even the economy that someone was talking about just now, are all products of a political system. You rightly mentioned China as an example of a country that uses political system to deliver economic goods for its citizens and then international respect for itself as a state. In Nigeria and much of Africa, our political systems are not based on any kind of social contracts between citizens and the state. So my question is, what is your view on rethinking and repurposing the state in Africa to deliver good governance? And then will the ASG be looking at teaching state formation in Africa?
Thank you. Monte Makmoki. Monte, I apologize if I do not pronounce your name very well. Monte. Our technical crew, please locate him because we're so many. I understand the challenges they're facing. If you are watching from YouTube, we don't take questions from Facebook. We don't take questions from YouTube. We don't take questions from television and radio audience because it's difficult for us to do that. But some questions have been posted and we'll send the questions to Professor Moghalu with your email and I can link the two of you together. Monte, if I don't pronounce your name very well, I sincerely apologize. Your question.
No apologies necessary, sir. Greetings from Toronto, Canada. 30 years in post-conflict development, including time in Africa, has made it manifestly clear how little I know and understand. But allow me to share this distilled knowledge based on my background. Sadly, in Africa, they have Potemkinized what they have learned from Western interlocutors, and they have abused power and privilege. Governance for me in Africa, within the African zeitgeist ethos, is that people are elected to steal. And once they are occupied centers of power, very reluctant to give it up, resulting in what I call catastrophic elements to the people lacking voice. And what is being done with this African Governance Studies program, all I will say, I applaud, I encourage. And the base grounding is education, healthcare, from the bottom up. The state needs to understand that those trusted with power are elected to serve, not to steal, not to embolden. And I say with profound regret, what we are witnessing in the West, including my country, Canada, and in the States, that autocracy, kakistocracy, corruption is becoming emboldened. And leaders need to understand that they are required to serve, then stand down without extending their time. I commend all of you, and I commend you, sir, as the moderator for your programs, and I wish all of you well. Thank you very much.
Monte, before you go, what do you think of the role of oligarchs now controlling democracy? We're talking about President Trump next Sunday. What would be your views on this while the rich people now being empowered to be part of democracy?
Interesting question, meriting a reflective comment. Oligarchs in short term can do magnificent, but they have now been corroded by their liminal sense of self-importance. Just because they have acquired massive wealth does not necessarily provide them with what I call a repository of good judgment, that they tend to consort with people like-minded. You need to be inoculated with external opinion. You need to have what I call, what Schumpeter said, intellectual creative destruction. And what the United States now is being templated is showing the worst of the worst, giving credence to Putin, aggregating other countries. As Trump is now seeking to acquire Greenland, he's making attempts to my country, Canada, not necessarily serious, but he is allowing Putin to justify Ukraine. He's allowing Xi to say Taiwan is part of my heritage. What is to prevent us from using kinetic force to acquire? It is now combustive. Africa can lead. Africa should lead. And I thank you.
Thank you. Professor Richard Joseph, I will grant you the floor. His Excellency Peter Obi, if you want to talk, I will grant you the floor. While waiting for you, forgive me, Simon Mary Akoa, if I can't pronounce your name, Simon Mary Akoa. Sorry if I mess up your name. I sincerely apologize.
No, it's okay. It's Ayoka. Even fellow Nigerians find it difficult to pronounce. It's nice to see.
Where are you calling from? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from the United States, from Portland, Oregon. I'm a professor of theology and ethnic studies at University of Portland. It's nice to see Professor Wariboko again. I came in late to the talk, but so to Professor Dr. Moghalu, but I would love to say this. The question of Africa's crisis is not an individualistic haphazard crisis. It's a very systematic process that led us to where we are. And I think the solutions we tend to offer are not as systematic as they ought to be, in the sense that Africa's imagination was colonized. And so if we really want to address Africa's crisis, we have to look at colonialities, what they do to social imaginations and all that stuff. So most of the time we ask questions, Africa is asking questions that are not Africa's questions, and therefore the solutions that arise are not Africa's solutions. So that said, I'm just curious about Professor Moghalu, what work does your center do with regard to articulating how social psychology can address Africa's crisis? Because these are pathologies that are playing themselves out in the continent.
So I like this question of social pathology because it's a very, very deep question. It's also an extension of Professor Wariboko's question on ethics. So I will just let the professor answer this question. Leave other questions aside for now. Because if you frame anything as pathology, right, the solution is surgery. It's a very difficult it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah. When I started my presentation, in response to a number of questions, I spoke about the African School of Governance as an institution, a graduate school of public policy and governance that intends to go beyond the norm of currently existing institutions. We want to address the problem of leadership and governance in Africa from the root. And this question of the colonization of Africa's social imagination is very important. It goes into the historical epochs and the consequence of the transatlantic slave trade combined with colonialism and what it has done to Africa's and the Africans' sense of identity. We will address this problem of social psychology in our curriculum through the subjects of leadership, through the subjects of African history, and through our approach in homegrown innovations. That is to say, an authentic African narrative. That's the purpose for the establishment of the ASG. It was to create an African narrative, to provide Africa-specific, Africa context learning about leadership and governance. So our worldview at ASG really sets us apart. It's not just going to be an academic institution, because I said in the beginning that we're going to prioritize mindsets, the worldview, how we see the world, how we see ourselves first.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. Isielen Agbon. Isielen Agbon. Agbon. Sorry for not calling you early enough. Where are you calling from?
Calling from Dallas.
Dallas.
Yes, I'm calling from Dallas. I have two questions I'd like to have response from the prof on concrete solution. I have always advocated that our political superstructure is Eurocentric and we have an African base. Therefore, in future, we should restrict our political party based on age, because the only thing we have culturally common to all African people is respect for age, and that every African country should have 4 political parties, that there should be a senior party for people above 60. Those people should be restricted to leadership at the local government level, local government chairman. The people between 30, 45 to 60, they should be people who are for president on national level and regional leadership. And between 30 to 45 should lead the state. And between 18 to 30, those should be the deputies at the local and state level. It sounds funny, but we all have respect for elders. And our society in the past have functioned because there was direct participation and direct democracy in which tasks were given to age group, even from 13-year-old, for contribution to society as African communities and for our reproduction on a communal level. So if you want to build an African political structure that overcome the colonial boundaries and these funny 54 countries that don't serve us economically, you must base it on a self-identity of an Africa that defines your role through your lifespan. You are not just in one party. When you get to one age, you find yourself in another party. We can then accommodate European differences due to ideology, ethnicity, religion. Myself and Prof can be in the same age group and have ideological difference because I'm a Marxist, but we're in the same age group and we function and we get practical. Secondly, economically, I think that we need to have cheap energy in order for us to be able to move a large percentage of our people to the middle class. We need to have a skilled workforce, and we need to have transport means for the cheap movement of people and goods. and and access to cheap capital. If we don't have these four things, all these industrial takeoff, the same thing myself and Prof teach our economic students 101 will not work. All we are going to have is the conflict that will come either because of ideology or a repeat of the selection of the inner core of people who have captured state power that lead to our sustainable underdevelopment.
Thank you,
so
sir.
I'd like to know what Prof thinks about
Thank
my
you.
recommendation
And
for Africa.
yes, sir. You're also formulating contents for their syllabus, because a school is going to generate massive amount of debates. So we're going to, all of you are going to receive the transcript of this conversation. And I promise Professor Moghalu, I will also teach in the school myself for free, so that we are able to, there is no useless argument. What we call age grade in the hands of policymakers, it can be integrated into policies. So thank you very much. Tony Nandi. Apologies. Are you the president of something?
Right. Yes, I represent, I'm co-convener of Nigerian Indigenous Nationality Alliance for Self-Determination. We call it NINAS for short.
Where are you based?
I'm in Nigeria most of the time, but I travel quite a bit.
Okay, please.
My comment, glad to see Professor Moghalu, on stage discussing this subject. I will come from with the leadership challenge we're trying to dissect and unravel. I'll come from the cause-effect analysis angle and looking forward to the solution, because we can discuss for 10 hours. If we can't take away something that could become solution for the situation confronting us, then we might have wasted our time. I go in the cost-effect analysis straight to Professor Moghalu's brilliant expose on Nigeria's national TV when the currency began to plunge and the economy went into free fall. On Arise TV, Professor Moghalu was asked as the expert, what if you were the president of Nigeria today? What will you do to arrest this free fall? And he was very clear in pointing at the constitutional foundation upon which Nigeria is building that economy. He says, if we do not rework that constitutional basis, we will just go down, down, down until we collapse. That's the summary of what he said. And that is the contention, that is the campaign, that is the pursuit of the organization I lead, or at least speak for, in which we're saying for Nigeria, and by extension the African continent, because the constitution we have on the table didn't just come in 1999. It goes all the way back to 1914, when the Union was, covered by Britain for its own purposes. By 1960, the little discussions we had in Lancaster House collapsed in 1966.
Thank you.
So what my question is, Professor Moghalu, please.
Thank you.
If we were to make a choice today to continue that construction of Nigeria on the foundation that is doomed to fail, all of us agree on that. We are going to another election in 2027, mandated by that constitution that guarantees corruption, guarantees impunity, guarantees infrastructural failure by the exclusive list we have. And we've been trying to persuade our competitors to say, why can't we dress back a little and get into a transitioning that might enable us rework that foundation before the house collapses on all of us? And so we say, Professor Moghalu, will you subscribe to Nigeria proceeding to another election in 2027 with the 1999 constitution still in place? Or can we take this period left between now and that election to go into a process that can enable us rework it and have something in place to begin to organize our society? That's my question.
Professor Moghalu, we're so happy that we now have 9.1 million people who have watched this program. Because if they're filing reports to me on the number on various platforms. Babafemi Ojudu, former Senator of the Federal Republic, if you want to talk, I will let you talk. His Excellency Peter Obi, if you want to talk. Professor Richard Joseph, if you want to talk, I will give you the floor. Professor Ojudu, Senator Ojudu just released his memoir, a very fascinating book, which we'll invite him to talk about that book in one of our programs. Nsikak Akpabio. Nsikak Akpabio. Please show his video. Let's see his face. Meanwhile, keep talking, sir. Keep talking in the interest of time.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I'm joining from Nigeria, as you can see. There's no light. There's no power. So I'm improvising. Well, I really appreciate Prof for what he has said and all the talks about redefining our philosophy. But my real concern,
yes, please, question,
is the area of education, because we can get education right from the primary to secondary, because it'll be very hard for when people are not properly educated. You try to reform them when they have already misinformed. So how can we get education right in Nigeria so that our people will not have to be going outside to get proper education? I've observed recently that many Nigerians outside are actually sending their children back to study in Nigeria, while many Nigerians in Nigeria are also trying to send their children outside to go and study. Why can't we make education? And will it be wrong to say that let every political office holder, every public office holder, have their children schooled in public schools in Nigeria?
Thank you. I can see your son listening to you. That's good.
Yeah.
Chi Uba. We'll take a few more questions and we'll allow the distinguished professor to round up. Chi Uba. Olalekan Ajia.
I unmuted myself. Are you guys not hearing me?
Well, Olalekan Ajia now has the floor. We will come back to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Toyin Falola. Professor Moghalu, it's a big honor and pleasure to listen to you. I am so excited by the ASG idea, but I'm rather worried by something you said concerning the longevity of tenure of a leader, provided is delivering. We have so many examples of longevity that does not produce results. There is no doubt that we have President Kagame in Rwanda, and he certainly has been delivering some results for Rwanda and is a shining example in transformational leadership. But I begin to worry about the objectivity of the ASG, given that you seem to be towing a certain path of political correctness. Because this ASG...
Excuse me, in
sir.
response, he said he didn't, if you listen to his response, he said he's not suggesting that.
Okay.
That issue, Professor Wariboko challenged him on that. Okay. And he walked it back.
Okay.
And I was part of a delegation that has been sent to an African president to please consider that issue of longevity. We didn't have a good audience. It's unfortunate, but I think what he's trying to say that we should balance all these things, not that he's insisting on that recommendation, just on a point of correction. Emeka Wadura.
Thank you very much, Professor Falola, for that correction, because it's very easy in situations like this for people to run away with, sometimes notions that may not be accurate. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Emeka Wadura, you're calling from Temple University, somewhere around there?
Yes. I teach at Temple University for the past 15, actually 30 years. And I teach ethics. My backgrounds are in law and psychology. So I teach ethics, values, and human behavior at the university here. My question is for Professor Kingsley Moghalu, who is from Newi, and I'm from Azubu. By the way, the question has to do with, do we have a unified, centralized value and ethics from an African point of view? And what's the process? In other words, my question is, how would you bring about, without a language structure, which Wole Soyinka talked about in the 70s, how would you have an ethics or a value system there when there is no central language?
So isn't it that what we do is we accumulate, agglomerate, and arrive at certain basic ideas that run through? I thought that's how we do that, which we call Africa, that we can combine values from Igbo, Yoruba, Zulu, aggregate them, and look at the ideas behind them. I thought that's the way we normally do it.
What about the language issue?
Well, I will let him answer because once we're able to understand, please go ahead.
I have something to say on the language issue.
Go ahead.
The language situation we have in Africa is a reality we have to deal with. At the ASG, the language of instruction will be English for now. It is very possible that in the future, we will be able to accommodate instruction in one or two other African Union languages. Now, I said in answering this question in another forum that what we will do at ASG is to teach in a way that those who imbibe what we teach and our research and go back into their own cultures and render the principles, the mindset, the worldview, the knowledge, and the skills in their own languages, because that is the best we can do at this time. We cannot solve the problem of Africa's languages. In Nigeria alone, 500 languages are spoken. So ASG cannot reinvent the world. We can only work within the parameters of the things that exist and try to make use of them to have as much impact as possible. I lived in Tanzania at some point during my UN career. And I was there when President Nyerere died. First of all, it took me about 2 or 3 years of living in Tanzania to know that there were other languages other than Swahili. I was just, surprised, because the way Swahili is spoken and used in Tanzania, you will assume it's the only language. Now they have a problem that some of the other languages are dying off. But why did this happen? Because Nyerere enforced and, basically imposed Swahili. It's a unifying factor. And so I recognize that monolingual civilizations or countries have an advantage, because multiple languages, multiple ethnicities create the challenge of fractionalization for Africa. And paradoxically, the electorate is not developed, democracy itself becomes part of the fractionalization process. Now, I'm speaking as an intellectual. I'm not defending this or that person, But I come back to this matter of democracy. We must interrogate it. And we cannot say that it is only the multi-party Western model that must, if you choose it as a country, make it work for you. If other countries make other choices, they are entitled to make those choices, so long as those choices are working for them as well. What we don't want to do at ASG is to have the Western paradigm as our point of departure. It's not correct. We cannot do, the Asians did not do that. If you go to Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, they're not teaching you about, liberal Western values. It's what they're teaching you. They're teaching you from an Asian perspective. And at PSG, we want an African narrative, an African context, and an African voice. And we have no apologies to offer about that. But we recognize the difference of languages, and we will only hope that people can translate what they learn from here in their own language.
I will take 6 more.
Yeah.
And with this audience is high-powered. I noticed Professor Ogunyemi, former president of ASU. Thanks for joining us. I'm calling you again, Chris Uba, Chi Uba. She spoke and said she's with us. Uba, UBA. Can you locate her? While waiting for her, Joe Mashaba. Kuda has been raising up his or her hand for a long time. Kuda? Okay, Joe Mashaba. Where are you calling from? Unmute yourself, please. Please unmute him. No, unmute Joe.
Okay. I'm in Captain Park in South Africa.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, I'm one of the students of Thabo Mbeki. I also work for the government of South Africa, the Department of Labor, to be specific. My question revolves around whether the challenge in the African continent is the leadership or the followership. I'm making it's a follow-up to the question that was raised earlier on. Now, I'm saying most of the African countries, they hold their election after 5 years. And in those countries, people are complaining about corrupt leadership. But when they stand for corruption, after the election, they emerge again. Now, the question is, does it mean that the voters are voting those people again in the office, or are they rigging the election so that they go back to the office? Because if we have got followership that is sensitive, that is anti-corrupt, they will not vote for those people into office again. But if a person like our former president, Jacob Zuma today, if he calls a meeting, he can fill in the stadium. And if he contests the election, he can also win the election. So where is the problem? What is it that we must do to our people so that they can see where the problem is? So I think I'm there. I don't want to take it further. Thank you very much.
The Zuma example is the same in Nigeria, the same in Uganda, the same everywhere. Uba, again, you keep raising your hand. We call you. I don't think we can locate you. Uba, can you locate her? Kuda. Samuel Akinuga. Yes, please, Samuel.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much, Prof. Yes. Thank you, presenter, for such a sterling presentation.
Who is talking?
This is Kuda.
Kuda,
from
please,
Zimbabwe.
can you highlight Kuda instead of Samuel? Keep talking, Kuda, keep talking.
Thank you so much. Yes. I've got a very short question. I'm a structuralist, and my worry is that Africa has no shortage of governance schools. Each country has got such an infrastructure in place. What makes yours unique? That's point number one. Point number two, I'm very much concerned with your approach. You seem to be concentrating more on leadership than governance. And are you not seeing the risk of conflating the two? Leadership is all about management. Governance is all about systems. And in your talk and in the approach of your school, you seem to possibly confuse the two.
Thank you.
Would you mind to respond to that?
Thank you, Kuda, because this question is very important. I will ask him to respond immediately.
Thank you very much. It's a very good question that you have raised. First of all, what makes African School of Governance unique? What makes us unique, as I said, is that African countries tend to think that their problem is lack of funding. They tend to think their problem is lack of aid. They tend to think their problem is this or that. There's always some external prop that's being sought, some external validation. They think their problem is lack of foreign investment. At the African School of Governance, we believe that Africa's major problem is the absence of competent governance. But we believe that competent governance, as run through properly designed systems and with skills, cannot be achieved without the right mindset. That's why we begin from the question of the mindset, the worldview, purpose-driven leaders. Leaders govern in a public sector system or even in a private sector system. Leadership is exercised through governance. So there's no distinction, there's no conflation of the two. Leadership is at the higher level of vision. Governance is at the level of execution. So you must have the right mindset and have the right vision as a leader before you can deliver the right kind of governance. That's the way we look at it. It's not that we are confusing or conflating the two. And ESG is unique because of this depth of our approach. We're going for the fundamentals. The governance is what is broken, but it is broken because we don't have the right kind of leaders. And we don't have the right kind of leaders because the mindset is wrong.
Professor Moghalu, what about the argument that we should worry about institutions, not about leadership?
Human beings make institutions work. If George Washington did not exist, if the founding fathers of the United States had not built, what's the Treasury Secretary's name? Hamilton. If Hamilton did not make the argument for a central bank of the United States, it might never have come into being. So human beings create institutions. Institutions do not create themselves. Now, when the institutions have been created by competent people who understand governance systems and have the political will, after those institutions have become strong over those centuries, sometimes a leader may come along who may not be the right kind of person. But those systems will be able to withstand because they have been made very strong over time.
Thank you. Thank you. On Sunday, next Sunday, we're putting together a team to talk about Trump and this issue of institution.
I wasn't talking about Trump.
I know.
Okay.
And this issue of institution will come up again.
But
and February 16, we are bringing Delifaro Timi to talk about law and order and politics. Samuel Akinuga, as we are rounding up,
Prof, let me we keep talking about institutions, but there are enough institutions in Nigeria and Africa already, right? So So the idea that we are waiting for leaders that will create. So how could those institutions be strengthened? Why are they not working? Because it's not that institutions are not there. They are already, there's so many of them there. So why are they failing us? Yes.
I always say that institutions need people behind them, not just to create them, but to run them the way they're supposed to be run. Otherwise, they will just exist on paper. I think that the distinction between individuals or leaders and institutions is a false distinction. When I was at the central bank was massively successful in reforming the financial sector, in restraining inflation down from 13% to 8%, among many other, in creating innovative payment systems. Why were we able to do this? Because the central bank was independent. Why was the central bank independent? Because the political leadership made a decision to allow the central bank to play its proper role. Even when there were interferences, we at the central bank stood our ground and we prevailed. Immediately we left in 2014, we know what happened to the same central bank, the same performing institution. We know what happened. The rest is history. So, yeah, so that's my point. No matter how good an institution is, if you appoint the wrong people to head it, they will bring the institution down to their level.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And Prof, yeah, it's great to see you again. I know you and I have had like countless conversations about, well, I've always been personally, I've been fascinated about your idea of that leaders having a great worldview. But in 10 years, I don't think you'll be at the ESG for 10 years, for the next 10 years. I don't know what the terms of your appointment are. But by the time you're done with your tenure at the ESG, what would you want your single biggest achievement to have been at that time? That's my question. Thank you.
So, Ngozi Uzoma, University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Ngozi Uzoma, please, your question.
Yeah.
Be brief, please.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, for your presentation. Mine is very short. As we know that African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a reality in the continent. I know you didn't address this issue. What will be the philosophy or the approach of ASG to after, in terms of it's easy to take, when it is easy to take goods from one country to another crossing the borders, but people cannot move within the continent. But it's easier. The idea is it is easier to take goods from country A to country B. The last time I was supposed to travel to Morocco, it cost me about 2.4 million naira. While going to Turkey is less than 1.5 million naira. So why should this happen? Why should it be so? So what is the approach of ASG to issues like this? Thank you.
Thank you. And there are many issues that we can organize a different conversation on. Why do we have all African countries with 50-something embassies? Why not one? Why can't we have one currency and things like that? Pelumi Folajimi, University of Louisiana State University. Louisiana State University.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Falola, and thank you, Professor Kingsley Moghalu. I am a student of Kingsley Moghalu's politics. I followed your politics very well around 2019, and Wole Soyinka was so much impressed by the ideas you expressed regarding politics and governance that he came to the public to endorse you for party. Fortunately, you didn't win the election. The people have a right to decide whom their leader will be. Currently, Of course, obviously, Nigeria is in a state of crisis, economic crisis, political crisis. Everything is upside down in the country. Our currency has collapsed. Our economy has collapsed. You are an expert in economy.
Are you not
Or as your
exaggerating? Are you not exaggerating
No,
that
I'm
the
not. No, I'm not exaggerating. I'm absolutely sure the economy of the country has collapsed.
Okay.
It is
So,
obvious.
okay, what's your
Yes.
question?
Professor Moghalu, you are an expert in politics and in economy. I want to ask you, please, what would be your recommendation and advice for the government of Nigeria, knowing that our economy has collapsed currently? Please, what's your advice for the government? They are listening to you. The press members are here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me crave the indulgence of Professor Moghalu to allow two more people. Saki Mark Anambraba. Saki Mark Anambraba. Where are you calling from? Please proceed. Saki.
Can you hear me?
We can. Where are you calling? Where are you
I'm calling from London, England.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Moghalu. I think I listened to your video where you were in River State in the early days of February, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I really enjoyed that. And thank you, Falula, for getting this together. And last but not least, thank you, my friend, Nimi Wariboko, for being there. Yeah, my question is simple. I think that with all the discussions about academics, about knowledge, about economics, philosophy, theories, and here and there, I don't think that there's a dearth of such things. Earlier, Nimi mentioned something like institutions. Everything is there. The laws are there. Now, my question is, what is the role of traditional rulers in terms of what is happening now? Because they are the forefront of the people. What do you think, what suggestion do you make in terms of working with the political class? Because the problem seems to be highlighted with the political class, their behavior. But what about the traditional rulers? What suggestion would you make?
And finally, Ekele Ngwandom. This will be the final question or comments. Ekele Afonso. Yes, please. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good discussion. Kingsley, good to see you again. My question is, I live in the United States and I participated in the political process of elections. And I witnessed the difference when Democrat or Republican leadership come to power and their policy influence on African continents, on different countries. And I did not really appreciate the democratic approach to countries like Nigeria and other places where we have elections that even the United States sent observers, and the observers did nothing to correct the corruptions. So now, this Kingsley, you know, the role I played in some of these areas was one of them. But what would your school do to curb foreign influence, to curb Western influence in our electoral process? In what way can we handle that? What will you teach the new leaders in this area? How can we resist Western influence in our politics?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this brings us to the end of questions and comments. So I will I will start with Professor Nimi Wariboko to make his closing statements with respect to all the questions. Thereafter, Professor Moghalu you'll pick the questions that are of interest to you because these are over a dozen, the ones that you think you need to address, and you will also make your closing statements.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Falola, and thank you, Professor Moghalu, for that brilliant presentation. I have no closing statement except to ask a question that we didn't have time to see. In all this thing, we've not talked about the role of religion in either holding back Africa's development or facilitating Africa's development. Because when we are talking about philosophy, worldview, morality, ethics, ethos, zyges, there is a place for religion and economic development. So my closing remarks, I want the professor to shed light on whether the current African level of belief or practices of religion is hindering economic development, or is there a way, because he knows how Max Weber in the Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism saw how in the West religion was transformed in a way that it became supportive for the economic takeoff, right? But apparently we are not seeing that in Africa, especially in Nigeria and other, maybe Ghana also. So in what way, my closing remark is that, how do we think about the role of religion in either moving the society forward or hindering us or even taking us backward?
Thank you. But there's a more difficult question, Professor Waribuko, with due respect, which is the alternative to the secular state. So because we can map out, within the context of your question, we can map out the embeddedness and the relevance. But the greater challenge is the argument, the challenge of the secular state. Because whether it's Boko Haram or the jihadists in the Sahel, they are saying that, or Boko Haram, we don't want the secular state, that we don't want this entire conversation we've been having in the last 2 hours. The democratic institutions within Western paradigm. Now, why can't they go to the Ummah of the 7th century? That's their own argument. Why can't the state be a caliphate? That is the complicated question. It's not for you. It's not for you.
Yeah, I know, but for the fact that he has a school of governance, right? Yeah. This is a relevant question, right? It's not.
I'm not dismissing your question. Yeah.
You and I may not like it, but it's a relevant question because it's a segment of Africa, like a population, millions of people asking that question.
Yes.
And a school like him will look forward to ideas and responses to those kinds of questions, and challenges. Yes.
Well, Professor, it's been a long day for you. I know you are tired, but there are some questions that you don't want to leave unanswered, either because of your reputation, because of the relevance of your school, because of your interest. Just choose them. Don't answer everything. And as you come to the end, you do your closing remark, and we pray for you that your school will succeed.
Thank you very much. There you go with the role of religion. Thank you all very much. Let me address some questions. One, I think it was Sikiru Yusuf that raised this question. What's the place of history in ASG's conceptual framework? History, as I said, maybe you did not join at the time. History has a very important role to play in the ASG's curriculum and approach. That's why we are going to have a Center for African History and Leadership, in addition to teaching African history, because we believe that the world has forgotten. You see, Winston Churchill said, history will be kind to me because I intend to write it. So this is what he said, and it is true. The victors always write history to suit them. The transatlantic slave trade did a lot of damage to Africa because it changed the narration of African history, whitewashed and wiped out Africa's contributions to civilization, to sciences, and all that. At the time that the pyramids of Giza were being built by the Nubians, where were the Caucasians? Where were so many of the other civilizations we know today? So Africa has been a major contributor to global history, but it's all suppressed. We will bring up our contributions without hiding the negative aspects of our own history as well. So history is going to be very important, because if you don't know where you're coming from, it's very difficult for you to know exactly where you're going. So history is a very important geopositioning satellite point of departure, because the lessons of history is what give you a worldview, an ambition for the future. The Chinese, part of why the Chinese have risen to be a great power is that the lessons of history left them with a chip on their shoulder. When they remembered the Opium Wars and how they lost the Opium Wars to the United Kingdom, and how the United Kingdom took over Hong Kong, and they had to sign a treaty giving up Hong Kong, it wounded their pride. And they decided that they will come back to teach these Caucasians that their civilization was, after all, older than theirs. So history is very important for the ASG and for Africa. Now, somebody asked a question about, or made a comment about economic hegemonic forces. It's real. The world is always full of hegemony. Hegemonies rise and hegemonies fall. When will Africa become a hegemon in the world? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in complaining about hegemons. I'm interested in finding a way through Africa can rise and outwit these hegemons and become a hegemon of its own. This is the lesson that history teaches us. It's not based on morality. I'm not, I understand international relations, and I am, if not a realist, at least a rationalist. So that's what I would say to that. Now, how can we repurpose the modern African states? No social contract, state formation. I think this was Chris Isike. Very important question. We're going to be teaching, one of the subjects we will teach at ASG will be the political economy of the modern African state, which will address issues of state formation, in Africa, and how that affects the reality we have today, and how we can navigate beyond the factors that drove state formation in Africa to turn African states into successful states, despite those factors, some of which we cannot change. Do we redraw or remove all the African boundaries? Do we overthrow the international law doctrine of uti possidetis that the Organization of African Unity adopted, that the boundaries must be kept the way they are? That is one option, but it's a hell of an option. And we know that is not particularly practicable. So that's my answer to that. Yeah, I've spoken about the colonization of Africa's social imagination. I love the comment about age-based leadership, age group. It's a great suggestion. And it is something that we at ASG can look into as part of our homegrown initiatives or homegrown innovations. I am an Igbo in Nigeria. We also have the age grade system in Igbo land, in some parts of Igbo land. So it's an African indigenous system that we should interrogate a little bit more in terms of whether our politics could be organized in that context, or at least partly so. But it's quite original, I must say. Tony Nadi, shall we go to 2027 without a new constitution in Nigeria, that is? Well, I think my position has always been very clear that Nigeria needs a new constitution. If Nigeria is to overcome the problems of its state formation and the current state of the economy and the polity, we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to manufacture consent, to use the phrase of Walt Lippmann in the United States. The ethnic nationalities need to sit down and say, what does Nigeria mean to us? And what are our rights in Nigeria? If there's a consensus, there can be more stability and more peace. Now, when that will happen, I cannot say. I would say the sooner it happens, the better. But we find that many political leaders do not have the courage to take on this question. President Jonathan called a national conference which addressed it, but he did not move immediately to begin to implement some of the recommendations. Instead, he deferred it, hoping he would get a second term, and he didn't get it. Today, the next president who came said that the National Conference recommendations and whole deliberations belonged to the trash can. And that's a direct quote, and we know that. So, but we cannot escape this question if we are to make progress as a nation. The very idea of nationhood is underrated and, marginalized in Nigeria. Our political leaders do not understand that without nationhood, the economy cannot function well. I said this in a lecture that I gave in 2024 or 2023, I think after the elections, that one of the reasons Nigeria's economy is the way it is because there is no sense of nation. Politics is all about who will control the gate. It's about a gatekeeper state. Who will control the spoils, of natural resources? And it's done turn by turn. So long as that is the case, the economy will not become productive. So creating a nationhood that gives all of us a very strong stake in the Nigerian state is a far wiser approach that I would recommend, rather than admiring the problem or avoiding it and playing the ostrich, which is what has been the case for too long. How can we reform education? Education can be reformed. And two things are very important. To reform education, you need resources. You need to prioritize education. But prioritizing education and putting resources, the resources must go to certain things. Not you want to double the allocation and use all of it to be awarding contracts. It will not reform education, even though you're spending more, So we need to reform the curriculum. We need to move to a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics-based curriculum, 70%. Because this is how you can re-engineer the productivity of the country. We need to expand the vocational system availability for people. And then we must match that with access to finance for people to be able to set up, small businesses or all sorts of trades that they will learn. So we need to reform the way we teach. The pedagogy of education is very important. We need to train our students to think more originally rather than cram and pour, as we say. So there's specific things. We need to invest in teachers in Korea, in South Korea, and Finland. Teaching is what is about the most prestigious population. It is no surprise that the education systems of both countries are very, very strong because there's a pride, there's social pride in teaching, the teaching profession, and in education. We need to recreate these things in Nigeria. So it calls for a sophisticated and competent approach to education reform. But Ghana has spent about 3 times more in its budget the last year on education than Nigeria. That tells you who is serious or who's more serious than the other. It's not to talk about it. It is to do it. That's what makes the change. Now, somebody asked, do we have a centralized African ethics and value system? No, we don't. But it is the conglomeration of different value systems that we can find what can work in our societies. And this is the approach the ASG will teach. It is not to recommend or to force anything down anybody's throat. It is to make it available in a way that makes its advantages clear. And governance, we will also have a policy studies directorate in ASG that will not be not just the teachers, but this is the policy engagement arm of the ASG. And we are recruiting for all these things. We are recruiting for the faculty. We are recruiting for the centers. We are recruiting for the director of policy studies as well, who will be like the think tank of the ASG. And our recommendations, our policy recommendations will go into every inbox of everybody that has influence in the African continent, in the governments, in the private sector, and in civil society. This is one of the ways we will seek to change thinking in the continent. Now, is the challenge in Africa that of leadership or that of followership? I come back to this question because it's very important. We know that our followership is very weak. But you see, Followers do not create education systems. Followers do not, they're, the nature of society is that the worldview and the transformation is usually led by the people in leadership positions. There's only one major practical example I have seen of where it was the followership that created the turnaround, and that was the French Revolution. That was where the citizens themselves rose up and overthrew the system. But even then, those citizens were influenced by certain philosophers whom they were reading and listening to. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, social contract, all of that. So our followership in Africa, with very few exceptions, is very laid back. And that is because of our cultural deference to authority structures. We're not able to get beyond that cultural deference to actually, as civil society, challenge, the peaceful marches that can actually create a change. So, I still believe that getting the leadership that can recognize the importance of followership and educate the people of our countries is really the solution to the problem, rather than thinking that our people are going to change anytime soon and suddenly become the leaders. It's not going to happen. When they're so poor, when they're so disempowered, when the cultural context, weakens them even more in front of, the authorities of the state. Leadership in Africa is seen as authority structure. It is about power. It's not about responsibility. It's not about service. And so we need purpose-driven leaders who will change this narrative. Now, finally, the ESG, the penultimate, the ESG in 10 years. This is from Samuel Akinoga. Samuel, thank you for the question. In 10 years, I see an ESG that is fully mature, has graduated a couple of thousand graduates at the very least. And many of those graduates are beginning to, first of all, the students we're looking for are starting from September, and our portal for admissions, applications will open on February 1, and it will end on April 30, the applications process. February, March, and April is the window for applications. The school will open its doors on September 1 or beginning of September for the MPA program. We have executive education programs that will begin around May or June, targeting African policymakers across the whole continent, private sector executives, and so on. So in 10 years, we see a critical mass of people already in existence. And in a few years, we'll begin a policy of placement, strategic guidance, and trying to position our graduates in places where they can make an impact. Finally, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFTA. What is the ASG's approach? Of course, we believe that the AFTA is a major breakthrough for Africa and Africa's economies. You see, one of the things we'll teach at ASG is what I call fundamental understandings for African leaders. And I'm going to teach that course personally. I'm not employed. I'm employed as the president of the university, the vice chancellor. But I'm taking it upon myself because the purpose of the school is to change mindsets and worldviews. And anybody who's going to be a future leader in Africa needs to have some fundamental understandings. One of those fundamental understandings is that global trade has not helped Africa and will never help Africa because it is structured against Africa. It's a systemic thing. And that goes back to the nature of the institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Trade Organization, and so on. We need to know how to make use of the World Trade Organization for our own benefit. But our leaders don't. How many African leaders have applied for the special and differentiated provisions of the WTO, where if you're a less developed country, they can give you 7 years whereby you can impose tariffs to protect your infant industries. Instead, Chinese products are flooding our markets and rendering our local industries completely redundant and taking them out of business. So what's going to help Africa is regional trade. Every major global region that is powerful has been built on regional trade. 70% of all of Europe's trade is within Europe. 60% of all the trade by Asian economic powers is within Asia. 40% of North America's trade, US, Canada, is within the North American zone. Only 13% of Africa's trade is inside Africa. So we are trying to trade with the rest of the world, whereas the only thing we sell to them is raw materials, and they sell us finished products. It's a dynamic that will never allow Africa to rise. So we need to add value to our products, and we need to sell a lot more within our region. So ASG will have a center for trade and Pan-African integration. That's how much we support the AFCFTA. So on that note, let me thank Professor Falola, Professor Nimi Wariboko, Lerato Mbele, although she could no longer come on with her own questions. We regret the snafu that occurred, for this opportunity to discuss the African School of Governance and how we will be part of the change that we hope to see in Africa. Africa is a sleeping giant. And I come back to the vision of the founders of the ASG, President Kagame and Prime Minister Haile Mariam, that educating a critical mass of the next generation leaders with the mindset, with the skills and the knowledge is the path to Africa's salvation. Governance is the key, but to govern well, you must have the necessary understanding and the necessary competence. You have to be trained to govern. And that's what we're trying to do at ASG. We're at the School of Politics. Some of our graduates may end up as presidents in the future because they may choose to go into politics. Some will be policymakers. Some may be entrepreneurs. But what we aim for is that wherever our graduates find themselves, they will have the same mindset, which is a mindset of transformation, mindset of purpose-driven leadership, mindset of competence and excellence in execution, a mindset of African agency and an African narrative, that Africans too are God's children, entitled to a place under the sun. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that inspiring closing statement. And I want to thank members of the audience by Zoom. Many staff figures I wasn't expecting, His Excellency Obi, or former Senator of the Federal Republic, or the House of Representatives, or still with us, the head of the Ahmadiyya movement. I was surprised to see all the staff figures. We are very grateful. And we stream this. I'm grateful to 21 countries, 23 countries that join us on various platforms. For now, we've recorded 12 million in audience. It's going to be bigger than that. And I'm very grateful to them. I'm grateful to our partners, the University of South Africa. We're very grateful. The Thabo Mbeki School, we are very grateful for your participation. Professor Wariboko, thanks for great questions. You can see the passion, the energy of Professor Moghalu, the vision for his school. Next week, the conversation is on Trump and Africa. And I want you to all come back so that you can enjoy it. For those of you interested in the school, I'm sure Professor Moghalu will be contacting you. Nimi can teach ethics of leadership. We have a professor who was talking about pathology. You are going to have some of us who will support you to make sure you are very successful. I can volunteer to teach African political thought by Zoom. And I wish you all well. And the proceedings of this conversation will be released in the next 5 minutes so that those who don't have the opportunity to join us will be able to watch it. Thank you very much. Until next Sunday, we're very grateful. Thank you.